It's low-income households being locked out of the rental market with no support.
You are going to put yourself in a position where you're spending somewhere upwards of 30 to 35% of your income on rent.
Having a good tenant in there and a solid tenant in there is priceless as well.
Rental affordability has hit its worst level in 17 years, with many Aussies struggling to put a roof over their head, if they can even find one. Welcome to Real Talk, realestate.com.au's property news podcast. Today we'll be looking at just how bad the rental market has become, which parts of the country are suffering the most, and what this could mean for the future of Australian housing. Joining me to unpack it is author of the 2024 Rental Affordability Report, senior economist at PropTrack, Paul Ryan, and Blake Mariner, head of new business at Highland, who is seeing firsthand the effects of rising rents and limited stock. Thanks so much for joining me for what is a super important episode, because while calling the rental market the Hunger Games does actually sound a little bit facetious, it's really a major issue that we're facing. And in a country as prosperous as Australia, it's really hard to fathom that we're in the rental crisis that we are. Paul, can you take us through the state of play of the market at the moment from a national perspective?
We crunch the data from a top level, and really everything we've seen is pretty challenging for renters. It has been that way for the last couple of years. In regional areas in particular, it's been really tough since the start of the pandemic. But when we put all that data together on how many rental properties people of all different incomes across Australia can afford, yeah, it's the worst really we've ever seen. And based on our data, I think it's probably the worst rental conditions we've seen since the 1980s.
What does that mean in terms of dollars and cents?
The way we've looked at this is across for all households, not just your median income household. But if we drill down on them, and if you're a median income household in Australia earning a bit over $110,000 a year, you could afford to rent just 39% of properties that were advertised over the past year. And if you're in the bottom kind of 20 or 30% of the income distribution, you effectively couldn't rent any properties across Australia without putting yourself in a position of rental stress. That's spending more than 30% of your income on rents. So that's really, really tough. And that's where it's most tough, is anyone who is in that lower portion of the income distribution is finding it very, very difficult at the moment.
What do the average weekly rents look like in the capital cities?
Nationally, at the moment, typical rents are about $600 a week. It's pretty similar for houses and units. There's a bit of a trade-off between, for units, you tend to get a smaller property, but it's better located. So prices for houses and units tend to be the same, but that's not the case everywhere. And depending on where you are, so Sydney has been the most expensive rental market for some time now, but you're looking at more like $750 a week for a typical rental property across Sydney. Melbourne is one of the cheaper places to rent, about $550, $575 to rent in Melbourne. And other capitals are kind of around that level, kind of the high 500s, low 600s is pretty typical across Australia now. That's up quite significantly, about $200 a week since 2020 now.
Blake, does that line up with what you're seeing in your patch?
My core area is the Sutherland Shire. The Highland Group now has roughly around 6 offices located around Australia, 3 of those being within the Sutherland Shire. It's where our head office in Cronulla is located. And there's about 100,000 doors in the Sutherland Shire. I would probably say, and that reflects obviously units, houses, and everything kind of in between, anywhere from $400 a week up towards $3,000 a week. So we're seeing a lot across different price points and different styles of properties. But I would say on par, yeah, our average rental per week would sit anywhere for $700 to $800 a week. $700 to $800 a week will get you a 2-bedroom unit in Cronulla, whereas it'll get you further west a house in Sutherland. So that's the major differences. So it really kind of comes down to what the demographic within the Sutherland Shire is looking for, most of those being families or young professionals. And that kind of varies depending on price point and obviously depending on, what they're after as well.
Paul, how do these numbers compare historically?
Rental affordability improved for about the decade before the pandemic. We saw this period where rents growth was actually quite slow or pretty flat across most of the capital cities in particular. And incomes were growing at a faster rate than rents were. So we had this kind of protracted period where it was actually not so bad to be a renter. You wouldn't necessarily expect your rent to go up from year to year, or if it did, it was going up by $10 or $20 a week. Not like, the anecdotes we're hearing at the moment is rent increases of something in the order of, $100, $150 a week. And you can imagine that puts people under a huge amount of financial pressure when there are these unexpected increases in their costs.
Blake, what have you noticed in terms of price and affordability changes in the last few years in the Sutherland Shire? Have you been genuinely shocked, or are you kind of a little bit like, well, we expected this?
No one knew what to expect with COVID. Our business took a very proactive approach to the market. And to be honest, we were pleasantly surprised with what did happen, right? We actually saw our area kind of boom in relation to rental values. Obviously, that benefits, a landlord, but from a renter's perspective, the home never became more important as it was during COVID. I actually saw there was a lot of stock on the market. Our area through that period from about 2019 to about 2021 actually went through a massive residential boom in regards to dwellings within the area. So there was a lot of stock, a lot of new stock as well. And I actually felt that they performed probably a lot better than, say, properties in a more original condition. But the Sutherland Shire, to be fair, it actually increased quite rapidly compared to the eastern suburbs, which we've got a double bay office also now, do the reverse. So the last couple of years, we've seen a bit more of a recovery in the eastern suburbs, where the last 2 to 3 years, we saw a massive boom in regards to rental increases in the Shire, which is now kind of leveled out, which, to be fair, I actually see, due to the stock levels, probably continue to increase over the next probably year or two until the dwellings are able to catch up with the demand.
So what are your days on market looking like at the moment?
Right now, for a unit, it's probably sitting anywhere from 7 to 8 days, and that's across the entire Sutherland Shire. Houses are probably up towards 10. And the tricky part with it is these landlords are obviously understanding that this is a great time due to demand to be able to put prices up. These days on market are quite low, but the prices are still going up. So tenants are understanding that, they've got to act quickly to be able to have a chance to be able to secure something. And yeah, look, it's very, very consistent across the Shire. I'm actually probably seeing the top end, and I would probably sit that $1,500 a week plus, probably pull back a little bit. And I think that's just got to do with cost of living. The bread and butter, $600 to $900 a week, they honestly sometimes they'll last one inspection, and that's at a really strong price as well. That's not at something that's below average at all. It's a strong price, and the returns are really strong as well.
So when you do hold an open, how many people are turning up?
For units, I would say average is anywhere from 8 to around 15 people. That's groups, which is very competitive, but it's the amount of applications we're receiving from those groups. So if we're having, let's call it 10 groups through a property, we would see at least 4 to 5 applications per property. And that's more so for I would deem more affordable properties, anywhere between, $600, $700, $800 a week. You're seeing multiple applications. It's when you obviously get up to that higher end where you're dealing with less people, therefore you may get less applications. But if something's deemed affordable and, attractive, it will go very quickly, and you'll see multiple people with, multiple applications applying.
Obviously, the competition is so tough at the minute. Are you seeing that these applications for the rentals are offering over and above the asking price?
I am seeing some people apply above, but what I am seeing is actually a lot of people not applying at less than the asking price. And around the initial period of COVID, you would see that, or even, 5 to 10 years ago, people would apply under market value, or the advertised rent, sorry. But, look, some people, depending on the property, will apply above, but I'm actually just seeing less applications under the advertised price, which is obviously a lot more than it was getting, 12 to 18 months ago.
Paul, how did we get here? What are the reasons for all of the above?
The house kind of changed in its importance for people since the pandemic. There was a big push towards people valuing space in homes and larger sized homes. And we've seen this broader trend that larger homes have increased in value by more than smaller homes, really since 2020 now. At the same time, the uncertainty of the pandemic slowed housing construction. A big thing, we know that a disproportionate number of new homes end up on the rental market. Lots of investors buy new homes, and that really helps increase rental supply. And we haven't had the rate of rental supply increase that we have had in previous years. On our estimates, about half the number of new rentals over the past year as we saw in the year before the pandemic. So this combination of people using more space, so we need more houses per household, as well as kind of fewer houses coming onto the market has put a huge amount of pressure on all of the housing market. And those people that have been pressured the most are people in the rental market. Really, at the moment, if you talk to first-home buyers, if people can scrounge the money together to get into a situation to purchase, a lot of people are doing that to avoid the really difficult situation in the rental market now.
So with such an intensified environment, what does it mean for the rental market as a whole? Because like at this very moment, because one thing that I can think of, it's low income households being locked out of the rental market with no support. So what else does it mean to have such an intense environment?
It's just tough, right? If you're in a situation where you're in the lower kind of 20 or 30% of the income distribution, basically to rent anything, you are going to put yourself in a position where you're spending 30 to 35% of your income on rent. So that puts pressure on all other aspects of household finances. We know that people at the bottom end of the housing distribution rely quite heavily on community and government housing. And that is something that has decreased over time as well. So there's less kind of government and community housing that's being provided. At the same time, so more people are being forced into the private rental market. And at the same time, we've got a private rental market that is more challenging than it has been in, at least 17 years at the moment. That has really meaningful impacts on where people live. So can people live close to where they can find work or their families? And if, their commutes, we're ending in this situation where suppose you're a nurse or a teacher in Sydney, where can you afford to rent on that salary? Often it's nowhere near where your workplace is.
Blake, are you seeing this reflected in your patch in terms of lower income households struggling to secure a rental?
The tricky part, I believe, and what I would deem a lower income, household within our core market would be, and it depends if you're a single mother or father with kids or a young family or whatnot. I've seen the lower incomes. The tricky part about it is they've probably been, because the higher price points, like let's call them closer to $800 to $1,000 a week, the people that were looking at those properties originally, they are finding it harder to get into those. So their best bet, or what they have to now do, is actually look a little bit less, which is actually closer to where a lower income household would actually find themselves more of a chance to get a property. So I'm actually just finding anything from $500 to $600 to $700 a week, like our most competitive price point. So yes, it actually does put them at a disservice. One, because there's more applications, and obviously at the end of the day, only one person will get the property. And when there's multiple people applying for those properties, the landlord is going to probably lean towards someone that is maybe making a little bit more money because they'll have a little bit more confidence around, them being able to pay the rent. But then also those lower incomes, they're being affected more so because there's less of those properties available because the rents have gone up. Not to say that they're not suitable tenants or not, the owners are just spoiled for choice.
Paul, which states are least affordable?
New South Wales, we found to be the least affordable state, with Tasmania close behind. Tasmania is an interesting one that we've actually seen Hobart rents fall over the past year. And so affordability there actually improved a little bit, which bucked the national trend a bit. We've seen rents in Sydney are very expensive. And yes, it's very simple to say, well, rents in Sydney are expensive, therefore it's the least affordable state. But incomes tend to be a little higher in Sydney. So putting those together, it still ends up that it is more expensive to rent in Sydney than elsewhere. This is both for purchasing properties and for renting properties. Sydney is the most expensive market. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we see kind of persistent outflows of people. People move south to Melbourne or they move north to Brisbane, partly because of housing affordability, both on the rental and purchase side.
Which capital cities are offering renters a little bit more relief?
Victoria is the leader in terms of rental affordability. I think this goes back to housing supply. Victoria has done a better job than other states lately in building homes. And it's very clear when you look at these data, what that means for renters. It means that rents are lower. Rents in Melbourne are $50 lower a week than even Brisbane, which is a smaller city, and $150 a week lower than Sydney. So you can see why that is appealing to people when you can get so much more for your money. And that's fundamentally not because people don't want to move to Melbourne. It's because they've just built more homes.
What are your thoughts on how the market might look moving forward?
The major thing that it all revolves around is supply. So what I am seeing, so right now, and I'll compare it to COVID. So just at the start of COVID. So right now there's only 250 properties available in the Sutherland Shire for lease. And that's, like I said, across 100,000 homes. So, on average, there's about 2.5 to 3 people living in those households, right, at a time. And from my side of things, it's very, very interesting because being so short supply, we're actually seeing that a lot of people, both tenants and landlords, like tenants don't want to go into the market. They're actually, when a rental increase, which a lot of landlords are doing right now because they have the ability to do so, they're actually just accepting the fact that they're going to have to pay a little bit more than they once were. Obviously, within reason, I've seen landlords be a little bit aggressive, maybe too aggressive in regards to their pricing based off what they're hearing and whatnot. But in regards to kind of where I feel like it is going, I think it only just comes down to supply. So our core area went through a massive boom at the start of COVID, and that helped, I felt. But right now, I just feel like a lot of tenants don't want to go to market. They're understanding that they've got to pay a bit more. Otherwise, they might have to pay even more than that in the open market. So they're just accepting what they can. And our advice to landlords is, yes, the rent is important. I get it. Interest rates are going up. They've got to cover themselves at the same time. But having a good tenant in there and a solid tenant in there is priceless as well. So there is always a little bit of back and forth in regards to that. But supply is very, very interesting across the country. But in regards to our core area, it's definitely a lot lower than it was in previous years. So to be fair, I actually probably see it continuing the uptrend that it's in at the moment, just due to supply levels.
You think about the actual cost of moving, and by the time you hire a truck and hire removalists, and it's the time it takes you to pack down a house, find a house, then set up another house, you could be looking at anywhere between like $5,000 and $8,000 plus the time, stress and effort. New housing supply is the obvious solution to the rental market crisis, and that's looking at things in a very simplistic way. It's a black and white kind of example. But apart from that, new housing supply, what do you think is the magic solution?
It's a case-by-case scenario. So families need to be, working with other families to be able to afford another property. I don't think that's the answer. I am seeing an increase in boarding houses within the area. I think that's going to be an option down the track for young professionals, singles. I just think people need to be a little bit more realistic in regards to what they potentially can get into. I don't think in our core area that share housing is the way to go. Overall, people just need to have a bit of a plan in regards to their 5 to 10 year plan may look like, whether they decide that they want to potentially go and buy something, which is obviously becoming a little bit increasingly harder to do. But I think it's just being as prepared as you possibly can. And obviously the areas that you're going to be living in. Some areas are a lot more unaffordable now than they once were. I guess the big picture to that is being able to remotely work. I think it's just having a holistic approach and an open-minded approach to what you may be living in kind of moving forward.
Paul, what about you?
I think we know that renters are starting to realize that they have to consider kind of, non-traditional property types, whether that's smaller properties, and non-traditional locations, so places they otherwise would not have considered. At the kind of micro level, how can people respond in the short term? Because as we talked about, like this isn't resolving itself in the near term. Like it's going to be a really tough 2024, and hopefully 2025 is a bit easier for renters, but it's still going to take a long time for that supply to come online. I think when we looked at this, the really concerning thing was low income renters, and we saw last year the government increased Commonwealth rent assistance by 15%, and that's a payment to people receiving government assistance. I think really that's a way that you can get money to renters that need it and that we know are on low incomes. And so there should be a greater discussion about increasing that payment again. And I know state governments also are starting to talk about whether the policy to reduce the number of government provided housing is one they should reverse and start to build more. These are things that will kind of help in the medium run. In the long run, the only really good thing that's come out of this crisis is that there has now been a recognition that this is a crisis and we do need to build more homes out of it. And the the discussion has moved to, well, where do we build those homes and how do we get them built? And that's, I guess, the good progression of this. Hopefully, we can meet this kind of national cabinet goal to build 1.2 million homes over the next 5 years. That would go a long way to solving this and really moving towards kind of a situation of housing abundance where housing isn't so expensive. That's always been this thing, when I've grown up and, housing is the most expensive thing. Everything else is cheaper. Food, clothes, education mostly is cheaper. It's just housing that costs more and more of everyone's budget every month.
My last question of the day is for you, Blake. For those who are in the rental market and who are finding it tough to secure a home, what's your advice to them?
You need to be open-minded to the type of property that you are obviously looking at, leasing. You need to be prepared with your documents. You need to have applications in. The open home is just as important as your application, right? So go there, ask the right questions, be engaged, be energetic. And, for me, that's just as good as an application, right? A strong application. If you can stand out from the crowd just from being a respectful person and, give us confidence that you're going to be a good tenant, that's feedback that we're going to be passing on to the landlords. So look, the landlords are obviously right now a little bit spoiled for choice in regards to the quality of tenants. But if your application ticks the right boxes, the right thing will pop up eventually. You've just got to be as prepared as you can.
Thanks so much for chatting with me today. It's been a really insightful look at a situation that, as we discussed, is only getting worse. So I guess let's hope that this is, darkness before the dawn. I appreciate your time. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining me. This has been Real Talk. For your weekly fix, please follow wherever you listen to your podcasts and tune in next time for more real questions, news and insights on the topics that matter most from realestate.com.au, Australia's #1 address in property. All information provided is general advice and opinion based on current market conditions. These opinions should not be treated as investment advice. Always obtain advice based on your individual circumstances.
Real Talk acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, air and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present.